Hi friends, this is Suzy, your Candy Crush guru, and I am here with Suzy Q&A, where I attempt to answer the questions viewers have about Candy Crush Saga. If you find these videos helpful, I'd ask that you consider liking and subscribing so I can continue bringing these to you. Alright, so there is a question that is asked way more than any other question in Candy Crush Saga. Can you guess what it is? Why is my level different? Okay, so the question why is difficult for me because I do not work for King and I have never understood their reasoning on most things. I mean, I do have my theories as to why they make all of the changes, but I'm going to instead focus on how the levels have changed and how we can beat the levels even though they have changed. So if we look at the question, how is my level different? There are two major types of differences we can look at. One is superficial changes, and the other is material changes. And I want to dispense with superficial changes right away, because these are changes that don't affect the strategies and how the game is played. They can look scary to us, so we need to address them, but once we understand them, everything becomes a little bit better. I'm going to use level 2541 as my example because there are a lot of superficial changes here, and one of them in particular is scary looking. So some of them are pretty easy to see. We've got Tiffy here, there's no Tiffy here. We can see the number of lives, we can't see the number of lives. Obviously that's a superficial change. That does not change the way the game is played. And then there are some that look like they could change the way the game is played. Notice that in the newer version, we have got a dispenser that shows both vertical and horizontal stripes. Sometimes we get one that just has horizontal or just vertical stripes, but this shows that we could get either or from these dispensers, and down here as well. Here we only have horizontal stripes, but that's just how the graphic was back then. We would get vertical stripes from these machines, but they just show up as horizontal on the dispenser. And then also you see these dispensers here, which are actually called cannons. These are candy cannons. I call them dispensers. So this shows cherries, which is important because we need to collect cherries. This shows hazelnuts, but it's still going to dispense cherries. We're still going to be able to collect these. So those are visual changes that don't affect the game. And then some of them are even stranger. Like they have redesigned frosting. It used to look like this, and we could easily count the layers. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 layers of frosting. But it was kind of funny because 1 layer thick frosting was just this little tin thing, and that was a bit bizarre to some people. So they redesigned it, and this looks a lot more like frosting, and it's more colorful, shinier. The problem is it's much harder to count. You have to really know how the frosting looks at each of the stages. This is 1, 2, 3, 4 layers thick, plus there's a background layer of white. Hard to see. So I'm not a big fan of the frosting redesign. It looks prettier, but it's harder to deal with just conceptually. It's still 5 layers. This is 5 layers and this is 5 layers. It's just easier to see that this is 5 layers. And then another one that has really thrown people is the popcorn, because we've got, sometimes I lose my mouse. We've got the popcorn here, but then we have licorice shells here, and they look totally different, but they operate the very same way. With each of them, we have to hit them 3 times by using some sort of special, a stripe or wrap or some sort of combo. If we just make matches next to them, it doesn't matter. But if we strike them, then they start to explode. The popcorn starts to expand until it pops. The shell starts to break away and we can see a color bomb underneath until the shell is removed. And then at the very end, once we have struck each of these 3 times, we will get the reward of a color bomb. So it looks different, but really the licorice shell is the popcorn with a makeup job. That's all it is. Looks totally different, operates the same. All right, so all of those are fairly basic, but there's one change in particular that has confounded people. And that is, on this level, it looks like a material change because we used to have to collect 60 jelly, and now we have to collect 120 jelly. But believe it or not, it's the exact same amount of work. It's the same amount of jelly, but they have counted it differently. So it used to be that if there was a single layer of jelly on here or a double layer, it was counted by square and not by layer. So this would count as one jelly, even though there's 2 layers here, even though it's thick. It's the same thickness as this. It's the same number of squares that are affected. And I compare it to a Twix bar. Because if you've got a package, it's got 2 bars in it. And you could say, I've got 60 Twix. And that's what they're doing here. Or you can count them not as individual packages, but as individual bars. And then you might say, I have 120 Twix, because there are 2 per package. It's the same amount of Twix. You open up all the packages and you line up the sticks, and you've got the same amount. But it's just the way you count it. So when you see this, do not get distressed. It can be a psychological taunt because it seems scary to have to clear out twice as many jelly. But that's not really what's happening. So don't worry. Proceed. The strategy has not changed, just the appearance. Now let's talk about when it's not superficial changes that have you stumped. Let's talk about when it's material changes, because these really do affect how the game is played. We're going to break these up into the basic categories I know of. Sometimes there are material changes simply because there's a glitch. There actually is every so often this really strange glitch that happens where some of the levels are reordered. So that if I'm playing level 2118, it looks like you're level 2841. And we don't know why this happens. They just get oddly numbered. And usually after about a week or 2, King will fix it all and put it right. But it is very strange when you go, wait, hold on, I just played this level 10 levels ago, and now it's being numbered as this, and mine looks completely different. So there's that glitch, and then there are other glitches. They sometimes change the way different candies or blockers or boosters operate, and when they do that, it can make a level unwinnable. If you find what you believe is a glitch, certainly you can report it to me with as much information as possible. I'll go on a glitch hunt and see if I'm experiencing the same thing you are. And of course, there are some good glitches. We usually call those exploits. Those are fun to experience as well. But we have to be concerned with the glitches that prevent us from winning levels. So I'll talk about some strategies when you come across those. Another type of material change is sometimes there's just a different version. And this comes about because there are different development groups for the different platforms. So sometimes playing through Facebook is different to playing through Android, is different to playing through the iPhone app or the Win 11 app. So oftentimes people will say, well, this has been updated. And I say, it's not really an update. It hasn't changed just because they've changed the level. It is changed because you're playing through a different platform. So that can be tricky to navigate as well. And then, of course, sometimes the material changes exist because sometimes it's an actual change. They have updated the level, like level 1476, which makes me very sad. And of course, you know what I think about those changes. But let's talk about what we can try to get over that problem that exists when there are actual changes or differences in the levels that I present and the ones you see. Especially when it is a glitch or when you are getting a different level because you're on a different platform. One of the easiest things to try for most people is to play the level on a different device or browser. And this can be a fun thing to experiment with even if you're not experiencing problems. Because sometimes levels are different from browser to browser, but then also sometimes the events and rewards are different. Now remember though that boosters and lives are stored globally on computers, but locally on mobile devices. So let's say you're playing on your phone and things aren't going well and there's a glitch, and so you want to go ahead and play on your PC and you're playing through Facebook and you pull things up and you're thinking, wait, I have over 100 color bombs and they're not showing up. They're not going to. If they were collected on your phone, they're not going to show up on your PC. If they were collected on your iPad, they're not going to show up on your PC or on your phone. The mobile devices are separate and they're stored locally on those devices. So don't expect everything to be there. But if you have a level that works better or a better set of events to collect more boosters, you may want to experiment every so often with these. Now, another thing you can try when you're faced with changes is to assess your assets and your liabilities. Because sometimes more than one thing has changed. Let's use the example of King removing moves. Let's say that when I played, I had 50 moves, and you now have 30 moves. They've reduced it by almost half, or we could even say half. We could say they've brought it down to 25 moves, and that may be the only change that they have made. That makes life more difficult, but then sometimes they have altered other things. So you have to assess what are the bad changes and what are the good changes. Did they also reduce it from 5 colors on the board to 4 colors on the board? Because that would saturate the colors and make it easier to make specials and combos. And so it might be easier to beat a level with 25 moves and only 4 colors than it is to beat a level with 50 moves but 5 colors. Now, it could still be harder. I'm not saying that it will definitely make things easier, but you do want to look at all of the changes. It's easy to focus on the negative. I want you to look at everything. And also when you're assessing your assets, you want to look at the boosters that you have that are plentiful, that might be able to help you clear a level easily, even though it has changed. Or some of your assets might be your own abilities. Like for me, I know that I don't do very well with conveyor belts, but maybe you love conveyor belts and you think, oh, well, Suzy had a hard time with this level and hers looked easier, but it's got conveyor belts and she's lousy at it and I know I'm great. So your asset could be your ability and even your outlook and perseverance and thinking, okay, this is more difficult than when Suzy had it, but I'm going to beat this because I know I'm just as good as she is, and so I'm going to do even better because I've got a harder situation. Now, sometimes there is an actual change and it's absolutely horrible and you can't even figure out how to clear the level. There is another thing that you can try, and that is to let me know how many moves you have, what your mission is, how long you've been stuck, what's the hardest part for you, what have you tried, all of those different elements that you have struggled with on the changes. Let me know, and I will do my best to try to redo the level for you. But if you just say, this has changed, redo it, and you don't give me information, and you haven't really persevered or tried on your own, I'm probably not going to be able to expend the time to help you. If you really want help from me, you have to give me that information so I know how best to serve you. And of course, it's also dependent upon the fact that, my life isn't crazy and chaotic at the time, because sometimes life gets in the way of Candy Crush. All right, I think that is it for me. I've covered all of the important things about changes that I can think of. Now it's your job to ask me questions about this and make comments and help the rest of the community. So please put your questions and comments below if you have any questions. And as always, thank you so much for watching. Bye-bye.